My gosh, Mr. Speaker, the Minister has answered the question fully. I can't ask a supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we can take great pride in how the economy has performed since the referendum took place. Record levels of employment, low levels of unemployment and inactivity levels in Wales now that are better than the rest of the UK. That's for the first time in decades. I look forward to the opportunities being participants in new free trade agreements right around the world will give to the Welsh economy.
If the UK leaves the European Union without... Now the honourable gentleman knows how popular he is. He has a right to have his question heard with courtesy, and we'll keep going for as long as necessary to ensure that that happens in every case. Chris Bryant.
I'm not sure it's worth it, to be honest. But if the UK leaves the European Union without a deal, how will Welsh farmers be able to sell their lamb in the European Union?
I've already mentioned the positive engagement that we have with the farming and rural affairs community and the new markets that are open to us. But the honourable member, by voting last night in favour of the motion and also by supporting the bill tonight, will just prolong the uncertainty and will not allow farmers to prepare. We are determined to leave the European Union. We want to leave the European Union with a deal, but we must draw a line and move on to exciting economic opportunities thereafter.
Christian Matheson.
14, sir.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to say July 2019 saw a 20% increase in traffic westbound and an 8% increase eastbound compared to July 2018. It is too early to make a detailed economic assessment, but our initial estimates were it would boost the Welsh economy by around £100 million a year.
Mr. Matheson.
I'm really pleased to hear of those benefits. So will you have a word with the Transport Secretary just along the government bench and get him to take notice of those benefits and have him remove the tolls on the Mersey crossing, which of course the Conservative government said they'd never levy in the first place?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Each crossing is based in an individual case, and the Mersey Gateway, as you know, built in 2017, was based on a 30-year concession to fund its construction.
Mrs. Madeline Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Commandant at RAF St Athens has put...
Very well done. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State has regular discussions with ministers at the Ministry of Defence on No. 4 School of Technical Training. I will be meeting with ministers at the Ministry of Defence shortly to explore options not only on maintaining St Athens' role as an important military and civilian site, but how to enhance the wider military presence in Wales.
Mrs. Madeline Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Commandant has said the school will close before April 2024. What steps is the Secretary of State taking, given that it's in his constituency, to ensure that the people there will have a chance to either move to Cosford or Lynor, or, even better, remain in Wales with this viable school remaining where it should be?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, thankfully, those who work at St based at St Athan have a very strong champion in the local MP and the Secretary of State for Wales in ensuring that the military presence is maintained. We just wish the Welsh Government was slightly more cooperative.
Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Siobhan McDonough.
Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will want to join me in paying tribute to PC Andrew Harper, who was killed while on duty. His death and the serious injuries sustained by PC Stuart Oughton in London and PC Gareth Phillips in Birmingham are a powerful reminder of the dangers that police officers face every day to keep us safe. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in the House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Siobhan McDonough.
Mr. Speaker, can I associate myself with the brave acts mentioned about the police officers? The former Brexit, Mr. Speaker. The former Prime Minister's deal was unacceptable to this House. But to leave without a deal is unthinkable. Yet the Prime Minister pursues a game of brinkmanship built on the livelihoods, health and future of my constituents and our country. But there is still an option to resolve this once and for all. If the Prime Minister really believes in no deal, let him put it to the people and ask our people if that is the price they want to pay.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Lady knows very well, this government will take this country out of the European Union on October the 31st. There is only one thing that stands in our way. It is the surrender bill currently being proposed by the leader of the opposition. And can I invite her to confirm, can I invite the leader of the opposition to confirm when he stands up shortly, that if that surrender bill is passed, he will allow the people of this country to have their view on what he is proposing to hand over in their name with an election on October the 15th, Mr. Speaker.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend confirm that when we leave the European Union on the 31st of October, no longer will we be subjected to EU rules on VAT in terms of our energy bills, costing Harlow constituents and households around £55 extra every year? Will he confirm that we will take back control of our energy bills and save households around £1.5 billion a year on the heating and lighting?
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend and for his excellent suggestion. As he knows, we do currently apply the reduced 5% rate on domestic fuel and power, which is the lowest allowed under EU law. But of course, when we leave the European Union on October the 31st, it will be open to us to change this for the benefit of the people of Harlow.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I start by paying my deepest respects to PC Andrew Harper, who died in the line of duty. It's a reminder about the risk that he faced and police officers faced all the time, trying to protect communities. Our sympathies to his family, to his colleagues and his friends. I also, Mr. Speaker, want to send our condolences to those people affected by Hurricane Dorian that hit the Bahamas at the weekend. I'm hoping and I'm sure that the government and DFID will be doing all they can to make sure all help is sent there that's necessary. Yesterday, it was revealed, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister's negotiating strategy is to run down the clock, and that the Attorney General told the Prime Minister his belief that the European Union would drop the backstop was a complete fantasy. Are these reports accurate, or can the Prime Minister provide the detail of the proposals he's put forward to the EU?
The Prime Minister.
I tell you, Mr. Speaker, what our negotiating strategy is, and it is to get a deal by the summit on October the 17th, and to take this country out of the EU on October the 31st, to get Brexit done. And what his surrender bill would do, it would wreck any chance of the talks, and we don't know what his strategy is at all were he to take over. He's asking for mobs of momentum activists to paralyse the traffic in the name of his. What are they supposed to chant, Mr. Speaker? What is the slogan? What do we want? What do we want? Dither and delay. When do we want it? We don't know. That's his policy. That's his policy. And can he confirm again, can he confirm now, that he will allow the people of this country to decide on what he is giving up in their name with a general election on October the 15th? Or is he for it?
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, my first question to the Prime Minister, and no answer given. I asked what proposals have been put to the European Union. We asked yesterday, many colleagues asked, and the Prime Minister seems utterly incapable of answering. Any rational human being would assume, therefore, none have been put, and there is no answer to that question. The Prime Minister and his Cabinet colleagues have been saying he's making progress. The EU's chief negotiator, the Chancellor of Germany, the Taoiseach of Ireland say no proposals have yet been made by the UK. If the Prime Minister thinks he's made progress, will he publish those proposals that he's put forward to replace the backstop?
Prime Minister!
As the right honourable gentleman knows very well, you don't negotiate in public, and we are making substantial progress, and we will get that backstop out.
Order, Prime Minister, please. Please, forgive me interrupting. There is a long way to go. There are a lot of questions to be reached. The questions must be heard, and the responses from the Prime Minister must and will be heard. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let us be absolutely clear. This government is going to get a deal from our friends in Brussels, and we will get the backstop out. We will get an agreement. I think this House can approve. The only thing that's standing in our way is the undermining of those negotiations by this surrender bill, which would lead to more dither and delay. We delayed in March, we delayed in April, and now he wants to delay again for absolutely no purpose whatever. What does he intend by this? We are spending, in this government, we're spending £1 billion to put 20,000 more police officers on the streets. He wants to spend £1 billion a month net to keep us in the EU beyond October the 31st, and I will never allow that.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, I really fail to see how I can be accused of undermining negotiations, because no negotiations are taking place. He's been Prime Minister for 6 weeks and he promised to get Brexit sorted. In 6 weeks, he's presented nothing to change the previous Prime Minister's deal, which he twice voted against. These negotiations that he talks about are a sham. All he's doing is running down the clock. At the weekend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster said food prices will go up under no deal. Will the Prime Minister publish the Yellowhammer documents so that people can see which food prices will go up and by how much?
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster said absolutely no such thing. I can tell him the preparations for no deal, thanks to his good offices and thanks to his efforts, are very far advanced. But I tell you, the surest way of getting no deal is to undermine this country's ability to negotiate, which is what he is doing. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that if this bill is passed this afternoon, I have to say I don't want an election. I don't think he wants an election. But there's a petition on his own Labour. There's a petition on his own Labour website with 57,000 people, including Carol, Nigel, Graham, and Phoebe, calling for an election. I don't know whether there's a Jeremy on the list. But, Mr. Speaker, I know he's worried about free trade deals with America, but there's only one chlorinated chicken that I can see in this House, and he's on that bench. Will he confirm again? Will he confirm that he will let the people decide? Let the people decide on what he is doing to this country's negotiating position by having a general election on October the 15th.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Well, maybe the Prime Minister could tell us what the negotiating position actually is. And since the question I asked, the Prime Minister may have forgotten it in his rather lengthy peroration there, that the British Retail Consortium said, and I quote, that it was categorically untrue when the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster denied there would be shortages of fresh food. Mr. Speaker, I hope no more young female staff are going to be frog-marched out of Downing Street. Because there was another government leak at the weekend concerning, Mr. Speaker, there was another government leak at the weekend concerning disruption of our ports. The leaked documents written by the government in the last fortnight show no deal would lead to shortages on the shelves and of medical supplies in hospitals. People need to prepare. So can I ask the Prime Minister again, will he publish in full the Yellowhammer documents so people can see which foodstuffs are not going to be available, which medicines are not going to be supplied, and what will happen to the shortages of vital supplies in every one of our hospitals all over this country?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid that the Right Honourable Gentleman is guilty of the most shameless scaremongering. We have made ample preparations for coming out of the EU. What his party is recommending is yet...
Order! It's very difficult to hear the responses from the Prime Minister. Members must calm themselves. There is a long way to go. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what he is recommending is yet more dither, yet more delay, yet more uncertainty for business. What we in this government want to do is deliver on the mandate of the people. Now, he used to be a Democrat. He used to believe in upholding the referendum result. Can he say now whether he would vote in favour of leave or remain? And can he say now whether he's in favour of a second referendum or not?
Jeremy Corbyn.
The Prime Minister failed to answer my questions about food supply, about medicine supplies and about the problems in hospitals. He refuses to publish the Yellowhammer documents and he talks about scaremongering. Where does the information come from other than his office in his government? And he's obviously so confident of the position he's adopted, he's now prepared to spend £100 million of our money on an advertising campaign in order to try to persuade people that everything's fine. He knows it's not, they know it's not, he is hiding the facts. The government has refused to publish its impact assessments on how a no-deal Brexit would affect poverty levels in this country. They received a request under the Freedom of Information Act from the Glasgow-based Poverty Alliance. The DWP replied that the public interest would not be served by that disclosure. Will the Prime Minister publish that analysis? If he won't, what has he got to hide?
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Right Honourable Member who would squander £1 billion a month of taxpayers' money on staying pointlessly in the EU, this government is getting on with running a sound economy so that the poorest people in our country are seeing increases in their wages for the first time in more than a decade. And I'm proud to say that those on the living wage, Mr. Speaker, are now taking £4,500 more home every year than they were in 2010, thanks to this Conservative government.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Speaker, you don't have to go very far from the portals of this House to see real destitution. People begging and sleeping on the streets. Child poverty is up since 2010. Pensioner poverty is up. In-work poverty is up. And he won't give us any of the information of the assessments of increased poverty that could come from his government's proposals. We are less than 60 days away from leaving the EU with no deal. The Prime Minister has had 2 days in office before the summer recess and then planned to prorogue Parliament. Yesterday, he lost one vote, his first vote in Parliament, and he now wants to dissolve Parliament. He's desperate, absolutely desperate, to avoid scrutiny. In his third day in office, after 5 questions from me, we haven't had an answer to any of them. I can see why he's desperate to avoid scrutiny. He has no plan to get a new deal, no plan, no authority and no majority. Mr. Speaker.
Order. If we have to go on longer because people sitting on the Treasury bench are yelling to try to disrupt, so be it. will go on longer. Some people used to believe in good behaviour. I believe in good behaviour on both sides of the House. It had better happen, or it will take a whole lot longer. Very simple, very clear. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister does to the country what he's done to his party in the past 24 hours, I think a lot of people have a great deal to fear from his incompetence, his vacillation and his refusal to publish known facts that are known to him about the effects of a no-deal Brexit.
Mr. Speaker, I really don't see how, with a straight face, the right honourable gentleman can accuse anybody of being unwilling to stand up to scrutiny when he will not agree. He will not agree to submit his surrender bill to the verdict of the people in an election. He's frightened. And Mr. Speaker, he makes a contrast. He makes a contrast between this government and his own proposals. The contrast could not be clearer. He thinks we think that the friends of this country are to be found in Paris and in Berlin and in the White House, and he thinks that they're in the Kremlin and in Tehran and in Caracas. And I think he's Caracas, Mr. Speaker. We're putting 20,000 police on the street. We're upgrading 20. We have 20 new hospital upgrades. We are growing the economy. He, by contrast, would put a £300 billion tax on every company in the country. He wants a tax on homes, and he's calling incessantly for a general strike. The Shadow Education Secretary says that their economic policy is, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, by your leave, shit or bust. I say it's both. I say it's both, Mr. Speaker. What this country needs is sensible, moderate, progressive, conservative government, and to take this country out of the EU on October the 31st, and that is what we are going to deliver.
Order. There will indeed be more, starting with the closed question. Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A well-behaved question 8 on the National Security Advisor.
Glad to hear it. The Prime Minister.
As my right honourable friend is aware, the decision to put the two roles together was taken by my predecessor, though I have a high admiration, I may say, for the gentleman in question.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Well, I hope my right honourable friend isn't going to follow every policy by his predecessor. This is one he shouldn't. The Defence Committee needs... to take evidence from the National Security Advisor on the previous failure to anticipate the Iranian reaction to the British seizure of a tanker in the Gulf. It's hardly likely, however, that the Cabinet Secretary will come before the Defence Committee. So wouldn't it make sense as soon as possible to have a full-time occupant of the post of National Security Advisor so select committees and the NSC itself can do our jobs properly?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the role has been very well performed in recent times. I take my right honourable friend's point very humbly and sincerely, and I will make sure that invitations to appear before his committee are considered in the usual way, and he gets all the satisfaction that he desires.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night, Parliament once again defeated this shambolic Tory government. Today, Mr. Speaker, we have seized back control from a Prime Minister who is behaving like a dictator more than a democrat. The Prime Minister must be stopped. MPs must unite across this House to take no deal off the table tonight. Mr. Speaker, we will defeat the government again. So can the Prime Minister tell us, when we succeed, will he respect the democratic vote of this House, the democratic will of the people we represent, and finally act to remove the threat of a catastrophic no-deal Brexit?
Prime Minister!
Mr. Speaker, I might ask the right honourable gentleman if he will respect the democratic will of the people of the United Kingdom, as this House voted to do time and time and time again, and that is implement the result of the referendum.
Ian Blackford!
Mr. Speaker, I know he's a new boy, but can I suggest to him, we ask the questions, he's supposed to answer them. And, you know, quite simply, Mr. Speaker, me and my colleagues, we are sent here by the people of Scotland. We have a majority. The people of Scotland voted to remain in the European Union. We're not going to be dragged out against our will by the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister also mustn't be paying attention to the polls this morning, which show that the SNP is polling to win a majority in Scotland once again, with the Tories in retreat. So if he wants an election, enable the bill and bring it on. It's clear for all of us to see that the Prime Minister is playing a game of bluff and bluster. He doesn't care about stopping a no-deal Brexit. His strategy, as his lead adviser put it, is a sham. This isn't a parliament versus the people. It is a parliament standing up for the people. Mr. Speaker, the people did not vote for a no-deal Brexit. This Prime Minister is robbing the people of power, handing control to the Leave campaign, a cult now running number 10. So once again I ask the Prime Minister, are you a dictator or are you a democrat? Will the Prime Minister accept the legislation today so that no deal can be avoided? And let us vote for an election so that the people can truly decide the next steps.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm a Democrat because I not only want to respect the will of the people in respect of the referendum, but I also want to have an election, or I'm also willing to have an election if the right honourable gentleman opposite's terrible bill goes through. I tell you there's a reason, Mr. Speaker, why the separatists in Scotland drone on and on about breaking up, about smashing the oldest and most successful political union. There's a reason why they go on about it, and that is to detract from their appalling domestic record. They are a total shambles. Look at them. They have the highest taxes anywhere in Europe. They have their educational standards falling, for which they are responsible. They're responsible for it. And their signature policy, this is a useful one, their signature policy is to return, after Brexit, to return Scotland to the European Union, complete with the euro and the full panoply of EU laws, and, as I never tire of saying, Mr. Speaker, surrendering Scottish fish just when they've been taken back by this country.
Lucy Allen!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I warmly welcome the Prime Minister to his place. My constituents sent me here to speak for them, and what they care about is better hospital care, more police on our streets, a good school for their children. Does the Prime Minister agree with the people in Telford that these are the issues we should be discussing in this place? And will he commit to building on his very welcome spending announcements to deliver great public services for my constituents in Telford?
And I thank the honourable lady very much. Of course, we love Telford, and Telford is going to see even more when my friend the Chancellor, my honourable friend the Chancellor, announces his spending review very shortly. There will be investment in NHS, in more police officers to keep our streets safe, to keep the honourable lady's streets safe, and more money for every school in this country, Mr. Speaker. Conservatives are delivering on the priorities of the British people.
Nicholas Chapman!
Mr. Speaker, you know I'm not a doomster or a gloomster, but on that positive note, I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for boosting support for Scottish independence. into his premiership, maybe his last few weeks in premiership. Prime Minister, according to the research published by the UK Trade Policy Observatory, a no-deal Brexit would cost up to 1,100 jobs in my Dunfermline and West Fife constituency and over 63,000 jobs across Scotland. Can the Prime Minister explain to me and my constituents who are facing this dreadful prospect and what their families should do in terms of the heavy price that they're paying for a Brexit they never voted for?
Yeah, of course, Mr. Speaker, we are preparing for a no-deal Brexit if we absolutely must. I don't think that the consequences will be anything like as bad as the merchants of Project Fear have said. But the way to avoid a no-deal Brexit is to allow this government to get on and do a deal at the summit on October the 17th. And the choice for this country is who do they want doing that deal? This government or that Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn?
Yeah, you know, we don't name people in the chamber. People must observe the rules. No, order. I am simply and politely informing the Prime Minister of the very long established procedure with which everybody, including the Prime Minister, must comply. That's the position. No doubt, no argument, no contradiction. End of the matter. Dame Cheryl Gillan.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the new Prime Minister to the dispatch box and tell him that this year we celebrate 10 years since this House passed the Autism Act. It is still the only disability-specific piece of legislation in the UK. The all-party parliamentary group, members from all sides of this House, are going to publish next week the 10-year annual review with recommendations for government right across the board. Will my right honourable friend undertake to look at these recommendations carefully and instruct his Chancellor to put more resources and more money into helping people with autism and their family receive the help and services they need?
Prime Minister!
I want to thank my right honourable friend very much for everything that she has done for that cause over many years, and also to reassure her that very shortly the Chancellor of the Exchequer will be outlining not just more money for primary schools and secondary schools, but also a big investment in schools for special educational needs and disabilities. And that is, again, delivering on the priorities of the British people.
Geraint Davis.
Mr. Speaker, people in Swansea voted to leave the EU, but Leave voters are saying to me they didn't vote for a no deal. They didn't vote for do or die on 31st of October. They want to live. They voted for good things, for more money, for more jobs, more control, and now they see they're going to get less money, less jobs, less control. So they want the final say. So will he undertake, when he goes to extend Article 50 after the passage of this bill we're seeing this afternoon, will he ensure that there's a proper referendum so there's a choice between a managed deal and Remain and not kamikaze no deal?
Prime Minister.
Well, I can tell the honourable gentleman that if he wants to put that matter to the people, then the best thing he can do is persuade his right honourable friend in the front row to summon up his courage, to stop being so frit, and if he's going to pass this wretched surrender bill, then at least to submit it to the judgment of the people in the form of a general election. And if he wants to implement the will of the people of Swansea, what he should do is vote with this government and not with the surrender bill tonight.
Mr. David Gauke.
The Prime Minister has said that the prorogation of Parliament was nothing to do with Brexit. Is that still his position?
Prime Minister.
As my right honourable friend knows full well, there has been demands for prorogation of Parliament in the form of a Queen's speech from the right honourable lady there, from across this House. This Parliament has lasted longer than any in the last 400 years, and on Brexit there will be ample opportunity. There will be ample opportunity to debate the Brexit deal after October the 17th in this House, if this government is allowed to get on and deliver a deal.
Mr. Adrian Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor today announced another £2 billion on top of the £6.3 billion already allocated to help companies after a no-deal Brexit. Industry, the public, and Parliament have a right to know which industries will benefit, for how long, and what the total cost will be to the taxpayer. Can the Prime Minister tell us?
Minister.
I can tell the honourable gentleman that there is a great deal of preparatory work going on, and particularly in the West Midlands, which he represents, to make sure that automotive supply chains are indeed ready for a no-deal scenario. But we don't want a no-deal scenario, Mr. Speaker, and the way to avoid it is not to vote for the absurd surrender bill that is before the House today, and let the government get on and negotiate a deal, because that is what we want to do.
Mr. Douglas Ross.
Mr. Speaker, the Scotch whisky industry is hugely important in Murray, and the potential tariffs applied by the US as part of their trade war with the EU could cost hundreds of thousands of jobs across Scotland and the United Kingdom. So what representations has the Prime Minister made to President Trump on this matter, and will his government do everything possible to avoid these tariffs being applied to the Scotch whisky industry?
Prime Minister.
I congratulate my honourable friend on everything that he does to represent that vital industry, which indeed earns billions of pounds in revenue for this country. And I think that tariffs on Scotch whisky would be absolutely absurd, a point that we've made repeatedly to our friends in the United States. But again, when we do free trade deals around the world, Scotch whisky is one of those many products that will have its chances boosted in export markets where it is currently growing.
Aaron Lee.
Mr. Speaker, last weekend in Lincoln and right across the country, there were cross-party protests against prorogation of Parliament. Does this unelected Prime Minister, who's got no majority in this House, believe that his attack on our democracy is his only means of forcing a disastrous no-deal Brexit on Lincoln and on the businesses and people of this country?
Prime Minister.
Well, if she wants to speak for the people of Lincoln, who after all voted to leave, yes, they did. I think the best thing she could do is make sure that we come out of the EU on October the 31st with a deal. And if she is genuinely prepared to frustrate that ambition through the surrender deal being proposed today, then will she at least have a word with her friend on the front bench and urge him, since she speaks of democracy, urge him to submit his bill to the will of the people in the form of a general election on October the 15th. Will she at least say that to him?
Karen Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of us in this House will know the value of community hospitals in our constituencies, none more so than the Leek Moorlands Hospital in my constituency. There's recently been a consultation on the provision of healthcare in North Staffordshire, and there's understandable concern about the future of Leek Moorlands. So can I ask the Prime Minister to join my campaign to keep the Leek Moorlands Hospital open in Leek with enhanced services for the benefit of all the people of Leek and the Staffordshire Moorlands?
Well, firstly, Mr. Speaker, can I thank my right honourable friend for everything that she has done for the people of Northern Ireland, and thank her rightly for raising this issue in her constituency with me. Of course, she will understand that decisions affecting Leek Moorlands must be led by clinicians, but I hope that a solution can be found that benefits everyone in my right honourable friend's constituency.
Blomfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a desperate attempt to win yesterday's vote, the Prime Minister apparently made emotional appeals to Conservative MPs that he was serious in seeking a deal. But his answers in the House yesterday and today make it clear there are no real negotiations, in public or in private. Those with whom he claims to be negotiating in the European Union have said nothing has been put on the table. So does the Prime Minister understand why across this country people find it difficult to trust a word he says?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, can I tell the honourable gentleman that what I think the people of this country want to see is us come together to come out of the EU on October the 31st with a deal. We are making great progress with our friends and partners both in Brussels and in Dublin and even in Paris. But those talks are being currently undermined, I'm afraid, by the absurd bill that is before the House today. I urge him to reject it, and if he must pass it, then can he have a word with his right honourable friend and ensure that that bill is put to the people in the form of a general election?
Dominic Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
In light of the Prime Minister's answer to my right honourable friend, the member for South West Hertfordshire, could the Prime Minister please then explain why it's proved impossible to find any official or minister prepared to state that the reasons for prorogation were to pave the way for a Queen's speech in the course of the current legal proceedings in which the government is involved? And would the Prime Minister like to reconsider the answer he's just given to the House?
Prime Minister.
I hesitate to advise my right honourable and learned friend about legal proceedings, but I think if he looks at what happened in Scotland this morning, he will discover that case was thrown out.
Ms. Karrenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So you won't.
As a result of budget cuts to the Home Office and largely enacted while he was Mayor of London, police numbers plummeted. 1,000 fewer officers in the West London Command Unit alone, 1/3 police officers down in my borough of Westminster. He is now promising us to get us back to where we were in 2010 with an additional 20,000. And he has told us, and he said again today, that those 20,000 will be frontline police and on the street. It is, however, now clear that at least 7,000 of those officers will not be frontline police. So, in order to help this House build some trust in any of the promises he makes, can he tell us if that is true?
Mr. Speaker, I think it's absolutely bizarre that a Labour Member of Parliament for London should ignore the role of the present Mayor of London, who is frankly not a patch on the old guy, and I left him £600 million, by the way. I left him £600 million, and he squandered it on press officers. Sadiq Khan has squandered it on press officers, and the faster we get rid of Sadiq Khan and get more police officers out on the street, the better. And that's, in my view, the best possible argument for Sean Bailey as Mayor of London.
Order. In the remaining minutes of this session, I appeal to colleagues to take account of the fact that we're visited by a distinguished group of Lebanese parliamentarians. At the invitation of the Interparliamentary Union and the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Lebanon, chaired by the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for South Holland and the Deepings. We'd like to set them a good example. I'm not sure at the moment how impressed they'll be. Sir Gary Streeter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think I can comply with that. May I welcome the extra £14 billion recently announced for our schools, especially in southwest Devon, where I understand we have the largest increase in the country to correct historic underspending. Does my right honourable friend agree that this cash boost will help our hard-working teachers to prepare the next generation to reach their full potential? And won't it be wonderful once again, when we can get through Brexit, that we can start talking about education, health and social care, the things our constituents are really bothered about?
Well, exactly right, Mr. Speaker. I thank my friend. Exactly why we need to have this 3-year investment in education and get Brexit done, Mr. Speaker, on October the 31st, and don't be attracted to any more dither and delay and confusion under the Labour Party.
Vernon Coker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister yesterday booted out 21 MPs from his own party for voting against a reckless no-deal Brexit. These included very well-respected members of this House, including a former Chancellor, including Churchill's grandson, and the father of the House, presumably on the orders of his Chief of Staff. Given that the Prime Minister himself voted against the former Prime Minister's deal without losing the whip, does this not show and demonstrate to the British public his view of life? Namely, one rule for him and one rule for everyone else.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take any lessons from the Labour Party.
Order. Leave me to control the proceedings. I should be immensely grateful for your assistance in that regard. That heckling must cease, and we will hear the reply. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take any lectures from anybody in the Labour Party about how they run their party. Look, this is a party where MPs, good, hard-working MPs, are daily hounded out by anti-Semitic mobs. let's be absolutely clear. If the Right Honourable Gentleman is actually interested in democracy, if he's interested in democracy, then I hope he's been listening to what I've been saying today. In an anti-democratic way, the bill before the House today would hand over this country's right to decide how long to remain in the EU, and it would hand it over to the EU itself. That's what that bill involves. If he thinks that's a good idea, then let him submit it. Let him submit it to the judgment of the British people in an election.
Richard Harrington.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you all know that tomorrow is the 9th annual Watford Jobs Fair. Now, I'm taking particular interest in the 1,000 or so vacancies this year. And I felt that other members of both sides of the House might be interested as well. I'd like to thank Victoria Lynch and Anna Cox for organising it. We've got 1,000 vacancies in more than 60 companies. Mr. Speaker, I would like the Prime Minister, if he has any spare time tomorrow, because there's not much going on here, perhaps he could pop up to Watford, where he'd be very welcome.
Prime Minister!
I thank my right honourable friend, who has been a wonderful champion for Watford and for conservative values, he's also done a great deal. I've been to campaign for him in Watford, and I've seen how popular he is. May I say that there are 20,000 job vacancies now in the police, if he wishes to take up that role, or if anybody in Watford wishes to take up that role, and there are many, many more in nursing, because, as he knows, in Watford and across this country, unemployment is at a record low and employment is at record highs because of the sound economic policies this government has followed. Thank you.
McInnes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the Director General of the CBI wrote to all MPs in the North West urging us to do everything we can to get a deal that works for businesses in our region. The CBI says a no-deal Brexit would be disastrous for North West business, particularly small businesses. And we all know what the Prime Minister has said in the past about business. But now that he has assumed a position of some responsibility, will he stop this relentless posturing around no deal, listen to the CBI and work to protect our vital businesses?
Prime Minister.
Again, a bit rich from a member of a party whose shadow chancellor says that business is the enemy, and she should listen. She should listen. She should listen. Where is he? Not there. Where he's gone. She should listen to the people of her constituency who voted to leave the EU and implement their wishes. And that is what this government is going to do.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, much has been made about provision for EU nationals resident in the United Kingdom post-Brexit. Much less comfort has been offered to those 1.5 million United Kingdom nationals resident throughout the rest of the European Union. Is the Prime Minister in a position to confirm, not on a piecemeal but on a pan-European basis, that all pensions will be paid in full, that exportable benefits will continue to be paid in full, that healthcare will be covered in full, and that rights of domicile and freedom of movement will be protected? There are frightened people who need an answer.
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend, and I can assure him that that matter is, of course, at the top of our concerns with all our EU friends and partners, and we've made it absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker, that the very, very generous offer that this country has rightly made to the 3.4 million EU citizens here in this country must be reciprocated symmetrically and in full by our friends in the way that he has described.
Stephen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has said the great city of Portsmouth is too full of obesity and drug addiction. Despite this disgraceful, inaccurate statement about my home city, how would he expect our much-loved NHS to deal with these issues when it is his government who is exposing us to medicine and staff shortages, according to his own Health Secretary, by hurtling us towards a no-deal Brexit?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I must correct the honourable gentleman because, in fact, unemployment is well down in his constituency, employment is up, and health outcomes are up. And when I made those remarks, which was many years ago, it was I'm afraid when his constituency had the sad misfortune to have a Labour government in power. That is no longer the case.
Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Like me, I know that my right honourable friend has deep concerns about the unfair retrospective loan charge. It is tearing families apart, driving people to despair, and reportedly some to suicide. With over 8,000 people signing my petition saying that we cannot go on like this, can my right honourable friend advise the House on what urgent action his government will be taking to address this?
I thank my honourable friend because this is an issue that my own constituents have raised with me, and I know that many of my honourable friends have had this issue raised with them. I'm sure that members on all sides of the House have met people who have taken out loan charges in the expectation that they could reduce their tax exposure. It is a very difficult issue. A very difficult issue, and what I have undertaken to do is to have a thoroughgoing review of the matter. And, of course, I will make sure that my honourable friend has every opportunity to have further discussions with the Treasury about how to redress the situation. But it's about the gravity.
Singh Desi.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, if I decide to wear a turban, or you decide to wear a cross, or he decides to wear a kippah or a skull cap, or she decides to wear a hijab or a burqa, does that mean that it is open season for right honourable members of this House to make derogatory and divisive remarks about our appearance? For those of us who from a young age have had to endure and face up to being called names such as Towelhead or Taliban, or coming from Bongo land, we can appreciate full well the hurt and pain felt by already vulnerable Muslim women when they are described as looking like bank robbers and letterboxes. So rather than hide behind sham and whitewash investigations, when will the Prime Minister finally apologise for his derogatory and racist remarks? Racist remarks, Mr. Speaker, which have led to a spike in hate crime. And given the increasing prevalence of such incidents within his party, when will the Prime Minister finally order an inquiry into Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, something which he and his Chancellor promised on national television?
Order. Let's hear the answer. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker,
Order. The response from the Prime Minister will be heard. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, can I just say to the honourable gentleman that if he took the trouble to read the article in question, he would see that it was a strong Liberal defence, as he began his question by saying, of everybody's right to wear whatever they want in this country. And I speak as somebody who is not only proud to have Muslim ancestors, but to be related to Sikhs such as himself. And I'm also proud, Mr. Speaker, to say that under this government we have the most diverse cabinet in the history of this country. And we truly reflect modern Britain. We truly reflect modern Britain. And, Mr. Speaker, what we have yet to hear from anywhere in the Labour Party is any hint of apology for the virus of anti-Semitism that is now rampant in their ranks. And I would like to hear that from the honourable member opposite.
Margaret James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The great lady who you and I both revere, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, once said, "Advisers advise, ministers decide." Can I ask the Prime Minister to bear that statement closely in mind in relation to his own chief adviser, Dominic Cummings?
Now, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The reply must be heard. If the House were to want, as a matter of course, to allow clapping by decision of the House, so be it, but it should not otherwise become a regular practice. But we've heard the question pungently expressed. Let's hear the answer from the Prime Minister.
Speaker, I'm used to breasting applause from Labour audiences, particularly since, unlike the gentleman opposite, we are actually devoted to delivering on the mandate of those Labour constituencies, and we are going to take the UK out of the EU on October the 30th. And as for the excellent question that my honourable friend asked, be in no doubt that we are deciding on a policy to take this country forward, not backwards, as he would do.
Finally, Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say to the Prime Minister that his response to the honourable member for Slough was appalling. Yes. An apology is what was required rather than some kind of justification that there is ever any acceptable context for the remarks such as he made in that column. He is the Prime Minister of our country. His words carry weight, and he has to be more careful with what he says. My constituent, Kristen, is afraid because her mum, a European citizen, has been struggling to get settled status after 45 years in this country. Our friends, colleagues and neighbours deserve better than his failures and his carelessness with language.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the case of his constituent, Kristen, if the case of her constituent Kristen, if she has indeed been here for 45 years, and I'm sure she has, then she should be automatically eligible to settled status. So clearly, Mr. Speaker, it is a difficult case, but the answer is for her to bring it to the Home Secretary, and I'm sure we can sort it out.
Order. I appeal to members who are intending to leave the chamber to do so quickly and quietly so that we can proceed with the statement by the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the questioning that will flow from it. Statement, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Chancellor Sajid Javid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me start by saying a few words around the circumstances around today's statement. We are in uncharted waters. I understand the strong feelings around the House on these important questions. But it cannot be right for a proud sovereign democracy to ignore the will of the people. If the House votes for this bill this afternoon, then all that we are doing is delaying what the people have entrusted us to do and creating even more uncertainty for our democracy and our economy through a general election that nobody wants. But, Mr. Speaker, we cannot allow that uncertainty to distract us from delivering on the people's priorities. So today, We give certainty where we can. I announce our spending plans for Britain's first year outside the European Union. After a decade of recovery from Labour's Great Recession, we are turning the page on austerity and beginning a new decade of renewal. A new economic era needs a new economic plan, and today we lay the foundations, with the fastest increase in day-to-day spending in 15 years. The plans I announce today mean that we will be able to build a safer Britain where our streets are more secure, a healthier Britain where we can care for people throughout their lives, a better educated Britain where every child and young person has the opportunity to succeed, no matter where they came from or who their parents are. We will build a global Britain where we will walk tall in the world with more, not less, of a presence on the international stage. A modern Britain where we will embrace diversity as a strength. An enterprising Britain where we will be proud of our scientists, our inventors and our entrepreneurs. A prosperous Britain where we will live within our means and growth comes from every corner of this nation. Today, we lay the foundation for a stronger, fairer and more prosperous future for our great country. And Mr. Speaker, it's been 3 years and 3 months since the British people gave us their instruction to leave the European Union. If people are going to have faith in the ballot box again, we absolutely have to follow through on that instruction. That is why we have set a deadline of October the 31st, just 57 days away. This government still believes that the best outcome would be to leave with a deal, and we could not be more serious in negotiating for such an outcome. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has set out our position, and our central ask is very clear: to remove the anti-democratic backstop from the withdrawal agreement. But without the ability and willingness to walk away with no deal, we will not get a good deal. And I know that some businesses and households are concerned about what a no-deal outcome would mean for them. I recognise that, and I understand that the uncertainty around Brexit is challenging. But this is ultimately a question in trust in our democracy. In the end, a strong economy can only be built on the foundation of a successful democracy.
On a point of order.
So let me reassure you of this.
Order. Yes. Points of order ordinarily follow statements, and I know the Father of the House is well aware of that. The opening remarks of the Chancellor were frankly out of order. I mean, that is the reality of the matter. I don't need any help from anybody chancelling a representative position. With a very greatest of respect, I will provide the rulings from the chair. That's the way it works in this place. I hope everybody's very clear about that. That's the way it works in this place. The opening remarks from the Chancellor were out of order. I exercised a degree of latitude. But the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman, the member for Rushcliffe, is right that the statement should be focused on and exclusively concerning the spending round. As it is, the Right Honourable Gentleman consulted me yesterday because he was concerned about the length of the statement. It shouldn't be longer as a result of remarks that don't relate to that subject. That's all I need to say. It's very straightforward, and I know that the Chancellor of the Exchequer will comply with that simple stricture. The Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, let me reassure people of this. If we leave with no deal, we will be ready. Within my first few days as Chancellor, I provided £2.1 billion of extra funding for Brexit and no-deal preparedness. And today I can announce that we will provide a further £2 billion for Brexit delivery next year as well. That means more border force staff, it means better transport infrastructure at our ports, and more support for business readiness. I've tasked the Treasury with preparing a comprehensive economic response to support the economy if needed, and will work closely with the Independent Bank of England to coordinate fiscal and monetary policy. Sensible economic policy means that we should plan for both outcomes, and we are doing so. But we should be careful not to let our focus on planning and preparedness distract us from the opportunities that lie ahead. Brexit will allow us to reshape the British economy and reaffirm our place as a world-leading economic power. We'll have the opportunity to design smarter, more flexible regulation, or to cut red tape that stifles innovation. We'll be able to replace inefficient EU programmes with better, homegrown alternatives. Even if we leave with no deal, I'm confident that we will be able to secure a deep, best-in-class free trade agreement with the EU, and we will be able to pursue a genuinely independent free trade policy with the rest of the world. Deal or no deal, Mr. Speaker, I'm confident that our best days lie ahead. Now, Mr. Speaker, while the immediate outcome of the talks are uncertain, there are some things that we can be certain about when it comes to the economy and our ability to set out what we can afford to spend. As we look towards our future outside the UK, we can build on some extraordinary economic strengths. At its heart, outside the EU, at its heart, this country is an open, outward-looking trading nation. We are at our best when we look out to the world beyond our shores. That's not just a slogan. We are the #1 destination in Europe for inward investment. Our language, our location, our legal system, and most of all, our people make the UK a global hub for business. We're the home of world-class businesses. A stream of ideas and innovations flow from our brilliant universities and research institutes, making the UK the second only to the US in all-time rankings for Nobel Prize winners. And we have an economic landscape that's been watched over by long-standing, well-respected institutions. And all of that will continue as we forge a new economic relationship with the EU. But, Mr. Speaker, the vision of an open, free market, enterprising economy is under threat. And if that transpires, it will have a direct impact on our spending power. It's not under threat from the people on the other side of the channel, but from the people on the other side of the chamber. Let's be in no doubt about the biggest threat to the UK economy. The #1 concern raised by businesses and international investors is not the form of our exit from the EU. The real Project Fear is the agenda of the party opposite. If they had their way, whole sectors of the economy...
Order, order. It really is very, very unseemly. And I'm sorry to have to say that to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's always been unfailingly courteous in his personal dealings with me and probably with everybody else. I say what I say with a heavy heart and not without reflection. There is a procedure to statements of this kind, a very long-established procedure, and it bothers me greatly that the Right Honourable Gentleman, in the course of a statement, seems to be veering into matters outwith, not even tangential, but unrelated to the spending round upon which he is focused. And I know that I say what I do with the vigorous concurrence of people who've been in this House a great deal longer than he has or than I have. And so I must ask the Chancellor, who I'm sure is fleet of foot, so to adjust his remarks from his prepared text that he focuses on that upon which he should focus and not upon that which is immaterial to the statement. And I'm setting out the position, and no one, be he ever so high, is going to tell me what the procedures in the chamber of the House of Commons are. The Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, you'll recall that when I first took my seat as a Member of Parliament of Bromsgrove, the economy was in a very different position, and since then we've had to work hard to restore the nation's finances. And it is precisely because we have restored the nation's finances that we can have the spending commitments that I'm about to make today. And I have to, Mr. Speaker, if I may set out the context of what the situation was then and how we've got out of that, so that we can focus on how we can generate the spending power that we are able to deploy today. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that back then our budget deficit was 10% of GDP. We borrowed £150 billion in Labour's last year in office. It was the highest deficit in our peacetime history. We were borrowing £1 in every £4 that was spent. The party opposite lost control of the nation's finances, as they always do, and it fell to Conservatives to pick up the mess. Now, Mr. Speaker, my two immediate predecessors took the difficult decisions that we need to bring the deficit under control that allows us to have the spending that I'm setting out today. They didn't do that for ideological reasons, but because running an enormous deficit meant that our debt was rising at an unsustainable rate, making our economy vulnerable to shocks and passing on a huge burden to the next generation. The deficit now, Mr. Speaker, is 1.1% of GDP. For the first time in a generation, public sector debt is falling sustainably as a share of our national income. And we've boosted our credibility around the world and built confidence in the UK economy again. Labour left behind a bankrupt Britain and we fixed it. Now, thanks to those difficult decisions and the hard work of the British people, we can now afford to turn the page on austerity and move forward from a decade of recovery to a decade of renewal. Mr. Speaker, our careful management of the public finances means we can now afford to spend more on vital public services. So today, I'm deciding to set the real increase in day-to-day spending next year at £13.8 billion, delivering on the people's priorities across the NHS, education and police, and giving certainty to all departments about their budgets for the next year, clearing the decks for a government that is delivering Brexit. And I've always believed in the importance of living within our means. And unlike the party opposite, I won't squander the hard work of the last 9 years. So even with the extra spending, we are still meeting the current fiscal rules. But while our biggest challenge a decade ago was getting the deficit down, our biggest challenge today is getting our long-term economic growth back to where it was before Labour's Great Recession. If we can do that, Mr. Speaker, we can make sure there can be future spending increases that can also be sustainable. Boosting wages and raising living standards which have stagnated for too long, levelling up across the regions and nations. And we need to improve our productivity, the amount that's produced every hour worked. That isn't just a technical term. Slower productivity means lower wages and uneven growth across the country. If productivity had continued to grow at its pre-crisis levels, then average annual wages would be £5,000 higher. That pressure on people's pay packets speaks to a wider sense of disillusion and unfairness, especially in so many towns and cities outside London and the South East. Even as the economy has grown, the people have worked hard and not everyone feels that they've benefited. There's a real sense of anxiety that's emerged over the years, a sense of politicians aren't listening and that the system isn't working, that the free market model isn't living up to its promise. We're seeing divisions emerge throughout society between regions and communities, rich and poor, rural and urban, young and old. And addressing those concerns will be a serious effort, and that's what will be shown in these spending plans today. So we will develop a new economic plan for the years ahead, a plan that moves beyond the last decade of economic recovery and looks forward to a decade of renewal, a plan that invests more in the future growth of this country. So, Mr. Speaker, we can afford to invest more because our economy is growing and our public finances are strong. And we are also deciding on our fiscal approach at a time when the cost of government borrowing is at record lows. Interest rates have been low for many years, and in recent weeks the cost of government borrowing has fallen below 1% across all maturities. In the years after the financial crisis, many expected interest rates to swiftly rise to pre-crisis levels, but structural factors have kept interest rates low, not just in the UK, but across the developed world, increasing our confidence that we will be able to continue to see low rates for a number of years. So it is my judgment today that with a strong fiscal position and record low cost of borrowing, we can invest more in our growing economy. That doesn't mean that we can borrow more forever and ever. The sustainability of our public finances depends on wider factors, not just the cost of borrowing. Our population, the global economy is slowing, the challenge of decarbonisation is real. So we won't be writing blank cheques, unlike the party opposite. We won't be able to afford everything, and we'll need to prioritise investment in policies that deliver real productivity gains and boost economic growth in the long term. We'll still need to make difficult choices about our national priorities, within a clear set of rules to anchor our fiscal policy and keep control of our national debt. So, Mr. Speaker, today I can announce that ahead of the budget later this year, I will review our fiscal framework to ensure it meets the economic priorities of today, not of a decade ago. Mr. Speaker, the first priority of our new economic plan will be to rebuild our national infrastructure. High quality and reliable infrastructure is essential to how we live, we work and travel. But the truth is that across many decades, governments of all colours have underinvested in infrastructure. The quality of our infrastructure means we've fallen behind our competitors. We're the 5th largest economy in the world. It isn't good enough that we're so far behind on infrastructure. It isn't good enough that so many commuters spend their mornings staring at a delayed sign at their train platform. It isn't good enough that our small business owners waste so much time because of slow internet speeds and poor mobile communications. We're going to change that. We want faster broadband for everyone in the country, quicker mobile connections and better signal coverage, cleaner energy, greener transport and more affordable fuel bills for our homes and offices. We want more trains and buses to connect the great cities of the north. We want to build world-class schools and hospitals. We want to push the frontiers of science and technology and turbocharge our ambition on research and development. We want to build and invest in every region and every nation of this great United Kingdom. From the motor highway to the information highway, we'll settle for nothing less than an infrastructure revolution. Mr. Speaker, to keep spending under control, we will of course set a high bar for funding projects, and they'll have to show real value for money with credible delivery plans and budgets, starting with the government's rapid review of HS2. We'll target that investment at national priorities like regional growth and decarbonisation. Let me take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to thank my honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford, for her tireless work as the chair of the all-party group on infrastructure. So, yes, Mr. Speaker, we'll use the government's resources to kick-start the infrastructure revolution, but we'll also do more to give private investors the confidence to back these projects too. We want all of this to be underpinned by strong, independent institutions. We set up the National Infrastructure Commission in 2015 and will continue to rely on its expert advice as we look carefully at other institutional reforms that might be needed. So our infrastructure revolution will be strategic and carefully planned. And speaking of revolutionaries, Mr. Speaker, let's contrast that with Labour's approach. I'll invest in new infrastructure that will grow the economy, and Labour will borrow hundreds of millions to renationalise unproductive assets and then run them into the ground. Mr. Speaker, the choice for the country is clear between a wasteful, ideological opposition with outdated ideas and a government that will kick-start a decade of renewal for this country. Mr. Speaker, today we lay the foundations of a new economic plan. We're turning the page on a decade of necessary work to fix the public finances and writing a new chapter in our public services. Health and education aren't just the names of departments. They're lifelines of opportunities. They're lifelines of opportunities, just as they were for me when I was growing up. The teachers and lecturers who persuaded me to study economics in the first place.
Order. Apologise to the Chancellor for having to interrupt. There will be ample opportunity for colleagues to question the Chancellor of the Exchequer, but the statement must be heard. The Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, health and education are lifelines of opportunities, just as they were for me when I was growing up. the teachers and lecturers who persuaded me to study economics in the first place, the police officers who kept us safe when the street I grew up in became a centre for drug dealers, the NHS that cared for my dad in his final days. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These are the beating heart of our country, and we invest to support them today. Mr. Speaker, as I turn to the details of today's announcements... Wait, it's coming. Let me first thank the dedicated officials in the Treasury for all their hard work, delivering what I'm told is the fastest SR in history. And let me particularly thank my right honourable friend, the member for Richmond, who takes the approach to spending you would expect from an adopted Yorkshireman. He's displayed his typical mix of energy, courtesy and rigour, and let me just say there's no productivity problem in the Chief Secretary's office. Mr. Speaker, next year I will add £13.4 billion to the plans for total public spending, including £1.7 billion added to capital spending. These extra funds take the real increase in day-to-day spending to £13.8 billion, or 4.1%. That means I'm delivering the fastest increase in day-to-day spending for 15 years. That funding allows us to start a new chapter for our public services and funds the people's priorities. Our decisions today have been guided by our ambition to build a safer Britain, a healthier Britain, a better educated Britain, and a more global Britain. Mr. Speaker, my family grew up on a road in Bristol that a national newspaper described back then as Britain's most dangerous street. But to us, it was just home. After we left, my brother became a policeman and has been in the force for over 25 years. So I've seen the impact the job has on the lives of those that are courageous enough to do it. So today I pay tribute to the bravery, courage and dedication of our hard-working police officers. As Home Secretary, I saw firsthand how the demands of our police forces are changing and increasing. Yes, traditional crime is down by a third since 2010, but the threats from terrorism have escalated and evolved. The internet is changing how criminals operate and break the law. And we've seen too many horrifying stabbings on Britain's streets. So with our frontline officers reporting that they are overstretched, it's clearly time to act and do more. And today, I can announce, Mr. Speaker, a 6.3% real terms increase in Home Office spending, the biggest increase in 15 years. That means £750 million to fund the first year of our plan to recruit 20,000 new police officers. With an extra £45 million this year so that recruitment can start immediately, getting the first 2,000 officers in place by the end of March. And let me thank my right honourable and honourable friends, the members for South West Bedfordshire, Wokingham, Isle of Wight, Nuneaton and Telford for championing the police and police resourcing. The threats facing our police officers are evolving too, so the way we resource them will have to evolve in 3 areas. First, serious and organised crime is the most deadly national threat faced by the UK, costing the nation at least £37 billion a year. The scale and the complexity of this threat means that we need to do more to develop our response. So I'm announcing today a formal review to identify the powers, the capabilities, governance and the funding needed ahead of a full spending review next year. Second, this year, sadly, has seen more attacks on places of worship, including mosques and synagogues. That's unacceptable in a diverse, open, tolerant society like ours. So to protect our religious and minority communities, I'm announcing today that I will double the places of worship fund next year. And I thank my honourable friends, the members for Hendon and the member for Finchley and Golders Green for their tireless work in combating hate crime. Also today, I'm announcing £30 million of new funding to tackle the scourge of online child sexual exploitation. Mr. Speaker, a better resource police force will deliver better outcomes for the British people, and it will increase the demands on our already overstretched criminal justice system. So today, we invest more in our criminal justice system to manage that increasing demand, with a 5% real terms increase in the resource budget for the Ministry of Justice and an increase in their capital budget to £620 million next year, and an extra £80 million for the Crown Prosecution Service. Taken together, today's spending round will dramatically improve the functioning of the criminal justice system, with more prosecutors, a reformed probation system, better security in prisons, and funding to begin delivery of 10,000 new prison places. Mr. Speaker, the spending round is delivering on the people's priorities, and there is no higher priority than the NHS. Last year, we increased NHS spending by an extra £34 billion a year by 2023-24. That was the single largest cash increase in our public services for more than 70 years. Today, we reaffirm our commitment to the NHS with a £6.2 billion increase in NHS funding next year. We're investing more in training and professional development for our doctors and nurses, and over £2 billion of new capital funding, starting with an upgrade of 20 hospitals this year and £250 million for groundbreaking new artificial intelligence technologies to help solve some of the healthcare's biggest challenges today, like easier cancer detection, discovering new treatments, and relieving the workload on doctors and nurses. Mr. Speaker, we can't have an effective health system without an effective social care system too. The Prime Minister has committed to a clear plan to fix social care and give every older person the dignity and security that they deserve. So I can announce today that councils will have access to new funding of £1.5 billion for social care next year, alongside the largest increase in local government spending power since 2010, and on top of the existing £2.5 billion of social care grants. That's a solid foundation to protect the stability of the system next year, and a down payment on the more fundamental reforms the Prime Minister will set out in due course. But that's not the only action that I'm taking today to support vulnerable people. On any given night, there are too many people sleeping rough on our streets. The human cost is too high. Today we do more, with £54 million of new funding to reduce homelessness and rough sleeping, taking it to a total funding of £422 million next year. That's a real terms increase of 13%. And can I thank my honourable friend, the member of Harrow East, for his tireless work in fighting homelessness. Mr. Speaker, a healthy environment is a precondition for a healthy population. And that's why we've set out an ambitious 25-year plan for the UK's natural environment. And today we go further. Leaving the EU provides an opportunity to set world-leading environmental standards, and we're giving DEFRA £432 million of funding to do so. We're providing £30 million of new money to tackle the crisis in our air quality, and another £30 million for biodiversity, including the expansion of our Blue Belt programme, a vital part of our campaign to protect precious marine species like turtles, whales and seabirds. We're stepping up our leadership on climate change with new funding for BEIS to develop new programmes to help meet our net zero commitment by 2050. And we'll set out further details of our plans for decarbonisation and infrastructure in that infrastructure strategy later this year, keeping our promise to be the first government in history to leave our environment in a better condition than we found it. Now, Mr. Speaker, alongside providing for the health of our population, the most important task of a government is to educate the next generation. Education and skills are at the heart of our vision for a national renewal. The economy isn't just about GDP or PSNB. There are many broader tests that matter too. Our children, are they growing up to be better off than their parents. Do hard work and talent matter more than where you are born? A good school, inspirational teachers are the most effective engine for social mobility that there is. That's why today we are delivering on our pledge to increase school spending by £7.1 billion by 2022-23 compared to this year. Next year, we'll make sure that day-to-day funding for every school can rise at least in line with inflation and rising pupil numbers, with the schools that have been historically underfunded benefiting the most. Every secondary school will be allocated a minimum of £5,000 for every pupil next year. And every primary school will be allocated at least £3,750 per pupil, on track to reach £4,000 per pupil the following year. This funding will mean that teachers' starting salaries can rise to £30,000 by 2022-23, so that we can attract more of the best graduates into teaching. We've allocated nearly £1.5 billion per year to contribute to teachers' pensions. And we're providing over £700 million to give more support to children and young people with special educational needs, an 11% increase compared to last year. Nearly every other department I'm announcing today will be funded for just 1 year. But we recognise the importance of schools being able to plan. So we are announcing today a full 3-year resource settlement for schools, levelling up education, improving standards, and giving every young person the same opportunities in life, wherever they live in our great country. And let me particularly thank my honourable friends, the members for Bexhill and Battle and Cheltenham and St Albans, for championing schools. Now, Mr. Speaker, the education system is about more than just schools. For too long, further education has been a forgotten sector. Over 1 million young people continue their education beyond the age of 16 at colleges or sixth forms. And I know, because I was one of them. I went to my local FE college. If I hadn't had the teachers and the lecturers that I did, I wouldn't be standing here today as Chancellor. Further education transformed my life, and today we start transforming further education with a £400 million increase in 16-19 education funding next year. The base rate will increase to £4,188, a faster rate of growth than in core school funding. And let me congratulate my right honourable friend, the member for Harlow, and my honourable friend, the member for Harborough, for their representations on further education. The government will also increase early years spending by £66 million to increase the hourly rate that's being paid at maintained nursery schools and other childcare providers who deliver on the government's free childcare offer. And I want to thank my right honourable friend, the member for Chipping Barnet, for raising this issue with me. Mr. Speaker, our young people deserve high-quality services and support even after the school day is over. So earlier this year, following a recommendation from my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford, I visited the fantastic on-site youth zone in Barking. It was a brilliant example of how much Britain's network of youth centres add to their local communities, getting young people off the streets and changing lives for the better. So today, I'm asking DCMS to develop proposals for a new Youth Investment Fund and to set out plans to build more youth centres, refurbish existing centres and deliver high-quality services to young people across the country. Better schools, higher pay for teachers, more youth centres. That's how this government will improve social justice and create opportunity for all. But our ambitions for a truly national renewal don't stop there. We are a one-nation party, and this is a one-nation government. Mr. Speaker, so at the heart of our new economic plan is the need to level up across this country. Yep. Every region and nation in the United Kingdom will benefit from new funding that I'm providing today to police, to schools, to health, social care and much more. Today we confirm funding of £3.6 billion for the new Towns Fund, providing a wave of investment to our regions and places. Yeah. And a better transport links across the country will be a crucial part of levelling up across the nation. We've already allocated a total of £13 billion for better transport across the north. We'll fund the Manchester to Leeds route of the Northern Powerhouse Rail, and we'll set out more details, far more details, in the autumn on our new infrastructure strategy. Now, Mr. Speaker, you may not know this, but my dad was a bus driver. Having watched him work, I know that local buses can be a lifeline for many communities. So today we put the wheels back on the Great British Bus with more than £200 million to transform bus services across the country. We're funding ultra-low emission buses and we'll trial new on-demand services to respond to passenger needs in real time. We'll set out more details of our new buses in due course once my right honourable friend the Prime Minister has finished painting models for them. Now, Mr. Speaker, our new economic plan won't stop at the borders of England. It will be a plan for all nations of the United Kingdom. In Scotland, decisions taken in today's spending round will provide over £1.2 billion of extra funding for next year. And we are taking a further step today. Mr. Speaker, we are taking a further step today to support Scottish farmers. In 2013, when the UK government allocated the Common Agricultural Policy funding within the UK, Scottish farmers lost out. Today, we correct that decision, making available an extra £160 million for Scottish farmers, something that I know that my honourable friends on these benches from Scotland will be pleased to hear. I'd also like to take the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to thank my friend Ruth Davidson for everything she's done for that great nation. In Wales, today's spending round means an extra £600 million of funding for the Welsh Government. And in Northern Ireland, we are providing an extra £400 million from today's announcements. I welcome the case that's been made by the DUP for improved hospice care, for support for those that have been tragically wronged in the contaminated blood scandal. And those are rightly devolved matters. But I sincerely hope that the Northern Ireland administration will use some of the new funding that we're providing today to address those issues. Taken together, today's announcements will give the devolved administrations the biggest spending settlement for a decade. Mr. Speaker, throughout our history, Britain has always been at its best when we are open, global and outward-looking. Trading with the world beyond our shores has always been key to Britain's economic prosperity. And as we seize the opportunities of Brexit, we can establish new partnerships and trade relationships across the globe. For too long, we've let those trading relationships wither. And as my right honourable friend the Trade Secretary would be the first to acknowledge, this is a disgrace. So today, we invest in securing Britain's influence in the world. We support diplomacy with £90 million of funding for 1,000 new diplomats and overseas staff and 14 new upgraded diplomatic posts. We'll boost trade with £60 million to extend the Great Campaign for next year. And if you're in any doubt about Britain's important role on the world stage, just look at the bonanza of international festivals and events that I'm funding today. In December, we'll welcome the NATO leaders meeting. Next year, we'll host the COP26 discussions if our bid is successful, thanks to the leadership of my right honourable friend, the member for Devizes. In 2021, we'll host the G7, and in 2022, we'll host the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. Today, I can confirm the government's total commitment to this celebration of sport will be over £500 million. The Games will be a huge boost for the West Midlands, and I'd like to congratulate Andy Street for the leadership he has shown in that region. One of my personal highlights of the summer was meeting the England cricket team in the Downing Street Gardens. That World Cup winning side showed us the importance not just of talent and hard work, but of diversity too. A skipper from Ireland, a bowler from Barbados, and an all-rounder from New Zealand. As with our cricket team, so with our country, we are the most successful multi-ethnic democracy in the world. And I'm proud to live in a country where someone with my background can be Chancellor of the Exchequer. This spending round embraces modern Britain in all its diversity. And we make available today an additional £10 million to continue the Integration Areas programme that I first announced in 2018 as Community Secretary. That fund will continue to support thousands of the estimated 1 million adults in the UK who do not speak English well or at all. Openness to talent from around the world matters for our economy too. Once we've left the EU, we'll be able to create a points-based immigration system that meets the needs of the UK economy and the British people. We've already dropped arbitrary immigration targets. We've recently announced a new, highly flexible fast-track visa for scientists. And today, I'm putting funding in place to give victims of the Windrush scandal the compensation that they deserve. All part of confirming once and for all that Britain will always be open to the world's brightest and the best talent. Mr. Speaker, nowhere are our values of openness and tolerance better expressed than in international aid. The UK aid logo can be seen around the world, on health clinics, school books, emergency food supplies, and so today we protect our commitment to spending 0.7% of our national income on aid. Global Britain is about projecting our values into the world, but we know that hard power matters too. Britain already spends more on our defence and national security than any other country in Europe. We are one of only 7 countries to meet the 2% commitment to NATO. So today, we will go further still, with an additional £2.2 billion of funding for the MOD, a real terms increase of 2.6% for the budget next year, increasing again the share of our national income we spend on defence and national security. This year is the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings. We pay tribute to the sacrifices of the extraordinary generation of British soldiers who fought and died during that campaign. And today I can announce £7 million of funding for the Normandy Memorial Trust to complete their memorial overlooking Gold Beach, where so many troops came ashore. And we will also support the veterans of today's wars as well, as we confirm the funding today for the new Office of Veterans Affairs. And I congratulate my honourable and gallant friend, the member for Plymouth Moor View, on his tireless work in championing veterans. Mr. Speaker, I've set out today a big increase in public spending that will pay for more police and safer prisons, more nurses and better hospitals, more money for schools and further education. But now I turn to the remaining departments across Whitehall, those that have not been protected over the last decade. Investing in the people's priorities inevitably means difficult decisions elsewhere. Every spending review presented to this House over the last 15 years has had to find cuts from those departments. This party has never shied away from taking the difficult decisions to make sure that we live within our means. Those decisions were tough, but they have paid off. And so I can announce today that no department will be cut next year. Every single government department has had its budget for day-to-day spending increased at least in line with inflation. That's what I mean by the end of austerity, Mr. Speaker. Britain's hard work paying off. A country living within its means, able to spend more on the things that matter. Mr. Speaker, I am delivering today's spending round in unusual circumstances. Understandably, much of our attention and the attention of the country is focused on the important matters before the House later today. But we must not forget that Brexit is not all that matters to the British people. It is not the only topic at the dinner table. Today's spending round makes sure that if you fall ill, you can get the care and the support that you need. That when you drop off your child at the school gates, you can trust that they will get the best possible education. That when you walk down the street, you can feel safe and secure. And today, we move from a decade of recovery to a decade of renewal. Yes, we will keep control of the public finances, but we will invest too in the long-term growth of this country. It was just 6 weeks ago today that this new administration took office. The PM promised that we wouldn't wait until Brexit Day to deliver on the people's priorities. And today, we meet that promise. With a new chapter for our public services, a new plan for our economy, and a new beginning for this country, I commend this statement to the House.
John McDonnell.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the Chancellor to his new job? Although after that, I'm beginning to miss the old one. I believe that the Chancellor may be the first person to hold that role whose father, like my own, was a bus driver. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to welcome him to his new job. I also hope what they say is true, that you wait ages for one son of a bus driver to become Chancellor of the Exchequer, only to be followed soon after by another. Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid that's probably the end of what the Chancellor and I have in common. Let me thank the Chancellor for abiding by the convention of providing me with a copy of his statement. It was a compendium of meaningless platitudes. So could I ask him? Could I ask him to take a message back to the person who obviously drafted the statement? So if he could tell Mr. Cummings, the man who cancels the Chancellor's own speeches, sacks his staff without telling him, and then has them and
act like a Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the honourable member for Uxbridge is shouting at me. Last time he was shouting at someone, they had to call the police. So I don't think we need to go as far as that. And Mr. Cummings, who had the member of staff escorted, you might need to call the police.
Order. Calm must descend on the chamber, and people should try to operate at the level of events and in all parts of the House at the level of their important responsibilities as members of the House. John McDonnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, the member of staff was escorted off the premises by an armed police officer. Can I just say this? This is no way to treat a member of staff. But can I ask him to tell Mr. Cummings on the spending review, do not insult the intelligence of the British people. The people will see today's statement as the grubby electioneering that it is. This is not a spending review as we know it. This is straight out of the Linton Crosby Handbook of Opinion Poll Politics. The Tories have checked what are the top 3 or 4 issues in the polls, and they've cynically judged how little money they have to throw around to try and neutralise those issues and the concerns of people. So to come here and to try and fool us with references to people's priorities is beyond irony. When did this extremist right-wing Tory group ever put the people first? Ever? Were they putting the people first when they froze child benefit year after year, or introduced universal credit, a brutal regime? The result this summer, according to the Childhood Trust, was children scavenging for food in bins because they didn't have free school meals in the summer holidays. Were they putting people first when they cut council budgets and prevented 1 million elderly and disabled people getting the social care they needed? Were they putting people first when they cut social services budgets so much that we now have record numbers of children coming into care and 155 women a day turned away from refuges? We're expected to believe that these Tories, who for years have voted for harsh, brutal austerity, have had some form of Damascene conversion. I tell you, they treat our people with contempt. Announcements have been dripped out over the last week or so, all designed to give the impression of a spending spree. Announcements dictated by Number 10, meekly accepted by a Chancellor too weak to conduct a full multi-year spending review as he should.
That's the reality.
Even before the government's majority disappeared yesterday. We've seen the so-called headroom, which the Chancellor's predecessor had claimed was needed to prepare for a no-deal Brexit, spent instead on preparing for a general election. We all know the Chancellor may not be in his job very long, and maybe that's why he felt he needed to rush a spending round based on figures from March, rather than wait from the Office for Budget Responsibility to tell him officially what the rest of us have known for some time, that the economy, after 9 years of Tory austerity, is in bad shape and, yes, getting worse, stagnating. A full fiscal event would have meant new economic forecasts, the need for a fiscal framework to give departments security over the Parliament, allowing them to plan ahead after years of cuts. Instead, we get this sham of a spending review. They're claiming to be against austerity after years of voting for it. They're claiming to be using headroom, which he knows has largely disappeared. And yet they're still failing to deliver a real end to austerity. Let's take a look at some of the announcements that the Chancellor has confirmed today. For schools, the Chancellor has announced new spending of £1.8 billion next year. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has previously estimated that would cost £3.8 billion this year alone to reverse the cuts that have been made. Was the Chancellor aware, when drawing up his spending plans, that the Department of Education budget as a whole has been slashed by almost £10 billion in real terms since 2010? And so the reality is this, isn't it? That heads will still be sending out begging letters, and teachers will still be buying basic materials for their classes. And you know, they have some front to mention childcare. After the hundreds of Sure Start centres closed under their watch, undermining the start in life for our children. They mentioned that £700 million was announced for children with special needs and disabilities. Does the Chancellor know that the Local Government Association have found that councils already face a funding shortfall for SEN children of £1.2 billion by 2021? So the reality is that these children will still be left vulnerable and in need, and their futures in jeopardy. That's what it means today. And on further education colleges, they're getting a one-off £400 million amount. Does the Chancellor really think they should be grateful? Grateful for that, when he's cut £3.3 billion off them since 2010. And the reality is the economy will still continue to be desperately needed in the skills training that our economy requires, and our young people will still be denied it as a result. On the NHS, The NHS announcement of £1.8 billion spending for the NHS it's already been exposed as largely a re-announcement of existing money.
Yes, that's right.
And there's no mention, really, is there, of the £6 billion backlog in maintenance that need in our hospitals. Still, our hospitals using buckets to catch water coming through leaking roofs. Operating theatres closed because of the lack of maintenance over the last 9 years of austerity. And they mention GP waiting times. Any announcement on GP waiting times is likely to be turned out to be totally undeliverable. Why? Because we've just lost 600 full-time equivalents of GPs over the last year. They're just not there because of 9 years of lack of investment. And local government, any new money for local government today will be a drop in the ocean compared to what? There's 60% of their funding cuts which councils have lost in recent years. What effect does the Chancellor estimate his announcement today will have on, for example, the crisis in children's services that we've highlighted at every spending review and budget of the last 2 years? There's been a 29% drop in government funding after 8 years, and vulnerable children, as a result, are left at risk. On homelessness. He's mentioned just now, the Chancellor has mentioned just now, 54 million of additional spending to tackle homelessness. There's been a 160% increase in people sleeping rough. We've had people dying near the doors of Parliament in the last 2 years. The Local Government Association says at the moment, just to get by, there's a £100 million spending gap. The most vulnerable within our society put at risk as a result of their austerity over 9 years. And he expects us to celebrate an inadequate attempt to plaster over the problems that we have. And on bus services, he mentions 200 million. He mentions allocated to bus services. This is the third of the 645 million that's been cut from bus services since 2010. And on police, they seem to forget they cut 20,000 police officers. He expects us to celebrate what he's announced today. And we now know, at best there'll be only 13,000 on the streets. And just can he tell us actually how many will be frontline? If I tell him, yes, we will support him in terms of the investment to protect religious establishments and communities, and we will support him in terms of tackling the problems that young children, protecting children from online abuse. Of course we will. But you know, the real protections comes from those safer neighbourhood teams that we constructed under Labour, that we had in every one of our wards, with a sergeant, police officers and police support officers, all of whom have been wiped out as a result of terrorism. And on prisons, an honourable member has shouted out, not true. Well, he needs to go out into that community and talk about the increase in violent crime that there is within our community as a result of what's happened.
One last week.
On prisons, he's spoken of money to create another 10,000 prison places. Can the Chancellor just tell us, are they the same 10,000 prison places promised by previous Justice Secretaries in 2016, 2017 and yet again in 2018?
Good question.
And also, can you just answer us, how many suicides, how many assaults on staff have taken place because of their cuts to prison staff over the last 9 years? And will he or someone in the government ever apologise to the Prison Officers Association for ignoring their warnings about the effects of staff cuts on safety in our prisons? These are just some of the announcements we heard today, but there's many that we've heard very little about today. What about those that have been effectively forgotten in a Chancellor's opportunist one-year spending round? What about the real structural reform to address the social care crisis, which we've been waiting for how many years? 3, 4? All we have now is a sticking plaster of £1 billion, which will leave this sector in the same sorry state as now. What does that mean in real terms? It means 1.4 million not getting the care they need. 87 people dying a day before they get the social care to support them. I understand that the Chancellor's mates, the bankers, were pushing the other day for more tax cuts and less regulation. I suppose they think they've got a soft touch in number 10 and number 11. And I hope he sent them packing. But you know, when you compare how much has been cut from basic social services that we need and vulnerable people need for support, and then you compare that to, well, what it's calculated at, well, by the end of the next couple of years, £110 billion giving out in tax cuts to corporations. Exactly, yeah. You can see why people don't believe this government has any concept of social justice or equality.
Absolutely.
Does the Chancellor have any words either for the thousands suffering?
What's not true about it?
The honourable member for Uxbridge said pathetic. I'll tell you what develops real pathos. That's for many of us in our constituency surgeries are having to deal with people who are dependent on universal credit. And yet the Chancellor didn't have any words for the thousands who are suffering from the brutal rollout of universal credit, the people we represent, who now are queuing up at food banks as a result of the cuts. Traditionally, the spending review concentrates on department expenditure limits rather than social security. I appreciate that. But there's no reason why the Chancellor couldn't have signalled the government's intent, at least to end the misery and hardship that their policy is causing and to end the rollout of universal credit as it now is. I have to say, look, most shockingly of all, the Chancellor has given no sign, really, that he understands the scale of the climate emergency facing us and the urgency which a significant government response is needed. He mentions climate but allocates what is effectively minuscule amounts of funding to address what is an existential threat to our society. I hope that members will remember those who got no comfort from today's announcements in the next few weeks. If the government pushes ahead with their plans for tax cuts that mainly benefit the wealthy, that is widely rumoured. I hope members will remember all those individuals and all those services which were deemed too unimportant by the Chancellor to address today. Because, yes, I tell him, whenever that election comes, in any election campaign, you can be sure that the Labour Party will be reminding those people and the voters what 9 years of austerity have done to them. And today's failure to act. The opportunity today was to really end austerity, to start reversing austerity. Yes, to give people some hope. What a missed opportunity. And it will be, just as we remember, can you remember when, Mr. Speaker, we were told there was no alternative? There was no money? We all know the lines. We've heard them enough times. They weren't true then, and they aren't true now. The majority of economists have always agreed that there was another approach the government could have taken rather than austerity. And we always argued, and we were right, that austerity was a political choice, not an economic necessity. As recently as March, the party opposite ploughed on saying there was no alternative. So look at them now suddenly proclaiming an end to austerity. After 125,000 excess deaths as a result. after $100 billion taken out of the economy, after the worst decade for wage growth since the 19th century, just because there may be, what? An election round the corner. And after all that, to deliver what is a pathetic sum to spending departments who are on their knees at the moment, it's just adding insult to injury. A government not just callous and uncaring, but hypocritical as well. This isn't a government, it's a racket. They're pretending to end austerity when they do nothing of the sort. They're pretending to plan ahead whilst they plot a no-deal Brexit that would devastate parts of our economy. A Chancellor and a Prime Minister, as my right honourable friend said yesterday, no mandate, no morals and no majority. They're trying to distract us from crumbling public services and stagnating wages. And they've created, after a decade in charge, it's almost they forget. They've been in government for 9 years. They seek to fool the British public with fantasy promises of a Brexit deal they knew they couldn't deliver, and they weren't even trying to negotiate. A short-lived government that will go down in history for its unique combination of right-wing extremism and bumbling incompetence. A government that betrays the people it is meant to serve. I tell you, a government that will never be forgiven, but will soon be forgotten.
Mr. Speaker, at least you didn't try to throw a little red book at me this time. So, let's see. The Shadow Chancellor says he attacks the decisions that were made over the last decade to restore the nation's finances. He attacks the free enterprise system, the same free enterprise system that has delivered the prosperity that our nation enjoys. He refuses to recognise understands that a strong economy is absolutely necessary to pay for public services. Now, why have we made these decisions over the last decade that gets us to where we are now, where we can properly end austerity for good? Labour trashed the economy last time it was in power, like it always does. Let's just remember, the Shadow Chancellor talked about cuts that were made to public services over the last decade. Let's just remember what we inherited, the absolute mess that we inherited in 2010. A deficit, 10% of GDP, £150 billion in borrowing in that year, the biggest budget deficit in our peacetime history, the biggest budget deficit of any large industrialised nation. They were borrowing, Mr. Speaker, £5,000 a second. The deepest recession that we had seen in almost 100 years. And, Mr. Speaker, he talked about the bankers. Which government gave us the biggest banking bailout in global history? The last Labour government. That was our inheritance, Mr. Speaker. And it was absolutely clear that had that continued, that unsustainable rate of spending, with no link between what was coming in and what was going out, the country would have gone bankrupt, just like it did with Labour in the past when we had to go cap in hand to the IMF. That is the legacy of every Labour government. It took Conservatives to clear up Labour's mess, bringing the deficit under control, bringing debt under control, to have it falling for the first time in a generation in terms of proportion of national income, reducing taxes for 40 million people, backing millions of businesses, and a jobs miracle. More people employed today in Britain than at any other time in our history, the lowest unemployment rate since 1975. And the Shadow Chancellor talked about the impact on economic growth of our policies. Let me tell him about the impact on economic growth. Since 2010, since Conservatives were back in office, our economy has grown by 18.7%. That is faster than France, faster than Italy, faster than Japan. I'll tell him about the risk to the economy. The only risk to the economy is the Shadow Chancellor, his policies, and the entire party opposite. They have a tax hike, Mr. Speaker, for everyone. They have a tax hike if you happen to own a garden, if you want to give a gift to someone, if you want to go on holiday, if you own a home. Whoever you are, they've got a tax hike for you. They want to raid private pensions. Just this week we learned more about their plans. They want to confiscate 10% of almost all of our large companies. That's £300 billion they want to confiscate from pensioners from their private plans. Mr. Speaker, they also want to renationalise industries. Seven, 8, 9? I don't know how many industries they want to renationalise.
Order. Please resume your seat, Chancellor of the Exchequer. Thank you. I would just very gently point out that there is a difference, long understood and observed, between a debate in which there is a free play of arguments, ideas and commentary on policies, and a statement. Yeah. And the Chancellor of the Exchequer, with a little bit of encouragement from me, delivered a statement, and he has been questioned on the statement, and to the questions he's supposed to provide replies. It's not an occasion for a general political debate. No, I know exactly what the situation is, and I've got very much more experience of these matters than some of the people who think that they can criticise, so I do know what I'm doing. So the answer is, provide the answers to the question. Order! Provide the answers to the questions, and then other colleagues will have the opportunity to question the Chancellor. Requires just a little bit of versatility on one's feet. The Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I have to say, I didn't detect many questions, so I'll finish very quickly, because I didn't give an opportunity for members to ask proper questions. The simple truth is, Mr. Speaker, Labour are unfit to govern. They would not deliver Brexit. They would wreck our economy over again, and hard-working families will pay the price, and we will not let it happen.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, may I genuinely welcome my right honourable friend to his appointment and congratulate him on it, and sincerely wish him every success in carrying out his extremely important duties. May I also welcome the many spending announcements he made, and in particular, let's single out further education, which successive governments have been trying to give better priority to for really the last 30 or 40 years. I hope it shows an effect. Could he reassure me that these announcements he's made are consistent with the fiscal rules that of his predecessors, that we're still subject to the same limits on the deficit that were then laid down, and he's still aiming to achieve year by year reductions in debt as a proportion of GDP. If you can give me those assurances, then it demonstrates what he's just said, that he's able to make these welcome announcements because austerity has been brought to an end by the achievements of his two predecessors over the last 9 years.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, can I welcome the warm words of my right honourable friend? And I still very much remember when he had this position and all the excellent work that he did, and I hope I can learn from how he performed his duties as Chancellor. He's asked me a specific question, Mr. Speaker, on fiscal rules. This spending round is within the current fiscal rules, and that does mean, with the forecast that we have, that we expect it to lead to meet both the sort of key rules of staying within 2% of GDP in terms of borrowing, and to see a further fall in debt as a proportion of GDP. But I would point him to some of the other comments I made in my speech a moment ago about looking again at the fiscal rules, particularly with an eye to taking advantage of record low interest rates and trying to invest more credibly in an infrastructure revolution.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Chancellor for advance sight of this statement. I have to say that the gimmicks and gems that the Chancellor has presented today are nothing more than an effort to distract us from the crippling crisis that this government is dragging us into. And, Mr. Speaker, if that was meant to be a pre-election budget, if I was a backbench Tory, I would be quaking in my boots. In less than 2 months, we could face a no-deal Brexit, unless that threat is removed by the House of Commons today, supporting the cross-party bill to secure an extension. Mr. Speaker, the threat cannot be underestimated. We're standing here facing increased uncertainty due to Brexit, meaning the outlook for our economy and for public finances remains extremely uncertain. The economy has already taken a hit, as we saw GDP contracting 0.2% in the second quarter of 2019. As Paul Johnson of the IFS put it in The Guardian, making big fiscal announcements in a period of great economic uncertainty means we will have little idea how sustainable or costly decisions made this week will be. The risks are exacerbated by not having up-to-date forecasts from the OBR. And while the Chancellor has announced increased spending today, this will not help end austerity. No. It will only pause some of the hardship in the short term. Meanwhile, Brexit will bring lasting and long-term damage to our economy and to our citizens' livelihoods. With the economy already faltering, the Chancellor's predecessor has warned that a disruptive no-deal Brexit could have a £90 billion hit on the Exchequer and suggested there will be no money available. Mr. Speaker, a no-deal Brexit would be devastating for Scotland, with the potential to destroy 100,000 Scottish jobs and cost every person the equivalent of £2,300 a year.
Let's talk about your jobs.
Brexit's already caused UK manufacturing activity to contract in August for the fourth consecutive month to the lowest level since 2012. According to the BBC, sterling fell below $1.20 on 3rd September, to its lowest since October 2016. The Chancellor pretends his government is putting people first, when in reality his government is putting the cult of the Leave campaigners and their Brexit obsession before the interests of the economy and before the interests of citizens. But yesterday in Scotland, Mr. Speaker, the First Minister announced our programme of government, putting tackling climate change, protecting our economy and reducing inequality at the heart of our policy-making agenda. Here, we are talking about food and medicine shortages, talking about reducing opportunities for our young people and complete Brexit chaos. For the people of Scotland, this is a tale of two governments, and only the SNP Scottish Government is acting in our interests. The IFS is clear that pre-election bribes do not mean an end to austerity. The decade of austerity, which has cumulatively cut the Scottish Bloc grant by more than £12 billion in real terms, which has left people having to choose between heating their homes and feeding their children, and has reduced social security payments for disabled people 4 times faster than the cuts for others. If the Tories seriously wanted to make life better for their citizens, they would give Scotland its fair share. This means the Chancellor should repay the £140 million VAT owed to Police Scotland in refunds. Mr. Speaker, we have been arguing for years for the convergence uplift monies to be returned. There are 50 mentions of the convergence uplift in Hansard, 45 of those from the SNP, and most of the others in response to SNP questions. So I am pleased that the pressure that we and our colleagues in the Scottish Government have brought on this Government has come to. It also means Scotland must get its £3.4 billion share of the DUP's dirty deal Brexit fund. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Chancellor rule out any new confidence and supply agreement with the DUP, giving them more money before we get the £3.4 billion that we are owed? Furthermore, it will appear that the Chancellor will overshoot his government's borrowing targets. Can he confirm whether this is the case? And can he tell the House now what borrowing rule changes he will bring in the budget? Exactly. Can the Chancellor also guarantee that Scotland does not lose any of the EU funding that we currently receive? The UK Government must at the very least match the compensation scheme already put in place by the EU and Irish Government for the beef and suckler sectors in Ireland. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the Government must scrap the proposed £30,000 salary limit on foreign nationals. Scottish Government analysis has found the average EU citizen in Scotland adds £10,400 to government revenue and £34,400 to GDP each year. The proposed £30,000 salary limit on foreign nationals to the UK has been shown to be unworkable and it should be scrapped. Mr. Speaker, while the Tories balance the books on the backs of the most vulnerable and the most disadvantaged, the SNP Scottish Government are leading the way to deliver a fairer Scotland.
Mr. Speaker, first the Honourable Lady complains about the settlement with respect to Scotland. May I remind her that under the Barnett block grant, that Scotland will see an increase of £1.2 billion in its spending power next year. And on top of that, it will receive an additional £160 million for Scottish farmers, thanks to the representations of Scottish Tory MPs who seem to actually care about Scottish farmers. And despite that, she complains. And she talked about uncertainty. And so I would have thought she would welcome today's statement. This is, I think she referred to it as a budget. First, it's a spending round. And it's a spending round that's focused only on spending, not taxes or capital investment. But it's designed to give certainty to all departments across government on funding for the next year, and without this they would not have that certainty. And she also talked about, she claimed that Brexit uncertainty is damaging the economy. Well, need I remind her that since the referendum we've had a record rate of growth in British businesses, we've had record growth in jobs, almost 1,000 new jobs created a day, with more people employed today than ever before, and we've had record inward investment. If she wants to end uncertainty, then she would support the spending round and make sure we leave the EU on the 31st of October.
So the extensive interest in the Chancellor's statement, but I remind the House that there is a 10-minute rule motion to follow and there are other important business that must come on stream absolutely no later than 3 o'clock. Therefore, there is a premium upon brevity from back and front benches alike, and I make the obvious point that lots of people who want to contribute will not today, realistically, have the opportunity to do so. Sir John Redwood.
Wokingham and West Berkshire councils do need money for social care and schools. Current funding is not adequate. I'm very grateful for the Chancellor. This is very welcome. Does he agree with me at a time of world slowdown led by a manufacturing recession in several leading countries? A boost to the economy is much needed here, and this is part of that boost.
Yes, I know, Mr. Speaker, that my right honourable friend speaks with great experience, and I very much agree that one of the outcomes of today's spending round, it will provide a further boost of confidence to our economy.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor is claiming that this is a boom in public spending, but I think all of us will know just how big the bust has been, and nowhere more than in DWP spending, which will see a real terms rise of 1.9%, which is welcome, Mr. Speaker. But can I ask the Chancellor, if you take into account increases in the state pension and population increases, will he commit within that budget to no further cuts to working age benefits?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady will know that this spending round covers day-to-day resource or departmental spending, and she will know that almost the vast majority of DW spending is not covered by day-to-day spending. And so when we later get to a budget, we can say much more about DWP spending. But she will also recognise that the way that the spending round will help today for those that are more vulnerable is by protecting our economy, make sure our economy continues to grow and continues to generate jobs, which is the best way out of poverty.
Sir Michael Fallon.
Welcome the increase in defence spending, which is well justified by the increase in threats that this country faces. When it comes to the fiscal rules, can my right honourable friend reassure the House that any revision of those rules will never make the government vulnerable to the kind of charges of fudged targets, reference periods and spending classifications that characterised the last Labour government?
Mr. Speaker, can I thank him for his support for the change and the increase in defence spending, and also I can give him that assurance that when the fiscal rules are looked at in time for the next budget, it will be done openly, transparently and clearly, and that is exactly what is needed to maintain market confidence.
Mr. Edward Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Chancellor to his place? But isn't it the case that head teachers, chief constables and NHS managers simply can't rely on the Chancellor's fancy figures if Britain crashes out of the EU?
Absolutely.
Mr. Speaker, the independent watchdog, the Office for Budget Responsibility, said just 2 months ago that a no-deal Brexit would add £30 billion a year for the next 4 years to public borrowing. So what insurance has the Chancellor taken out against this massive risk to his spending plans? Isn't this just a con?
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman should know that the government has no plans, as he puts it, to crash out the EU. Our plan is to get a deal, and if he wants us to help us to get the deal, then he should not vote for the surrender bill tonight.
Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The real revolution that Britain needs is actually on social mobility and equality of opportunity. I welcome the investment announced today on schools, but can I encourage the Chancellor to revisit investment in children's services if he's really going to close the gap on opportunity? And can I also encourage him to look at reform close to home in his own department, because the Treasury simply isn't fit for purpose in understanding how to invest in Britain's biggest asset, which is its human capital, its people.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend speaks with great experience, and she's right to highlight the issues around children's services. And I would like to assure her that within these numbers today, she will see outside of the excellent investment in schools, there is investment across the board that would benefit children, particularly vulnerable children, particularly through social services. And I think she also makes a very good and valid point about the human capital and a need to look at that in a different way, and that's something I'm very interested in pursuing in the Treasury.
With Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Dominic Cummings hadn't sacked his special advisor, he might have come up with a better speech. I noticed the Chancellor didn't mention the growth figures. Not surprising, given the economy is shrinking and every major sector of our economy, services, manufacturing, construction, are all struggling. Isn't it the case that whether it's the future of those industries or the spending plans he's laid out today, every single one of those promises is at risk from the no-deal recession that his government is pursuing with a reckless no-deal policy?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman claimed I didn't mention growth figures. Well, I did refer to growth. But first of all, there are no new growth figures today because there's no OBR forecast. But I did refer to growth. In fact, I pointed out the IMF forecast that we will grow faster this year than France, Italy and Japan. But again, he talks about the risk to the economy. The risk to the economy is the uncertainty of not leaving the EU, and we must leave by October the 31st. And if he wants to end that uncertainty, he knows what he's got to do tonight.
Kirsten Hare.
Mr. Speaker, I warmly welcome this spending review. £1.2 billion in extra funding for Scotland, another £160 million for our farmers, and I was delighted to see the increase in the spending within the MOD as well. And I would urge the SNP Scottish Government to spend on education, on health, on policing and on connectivity in my constituency. But does the Chancellor agree that what we should be doing, what the SNP should be doing, is welcoming this extra investment, which shows the strength of being part of our United Kingdom and removing the threat of independence, which would unleash the economy in Scotland?
Mr. Speaker, I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend. Now, can I take this opportunity to thank her for helping me to focus on this issue around Scottish farmers, her and our colleagues on this side of the House, and that has helped secure this £160 million. But she's also right, the extra £1.2 billion Scotland will get, it's a huge amount, it's a record amount, but with the SNP, one thing unfortunately we can be sure of is that they will waste it.
At the heart of government's thinking in terms of the economy and what we can do in the...
Despite the best efforts of some members on this side to talk the economy down, I'm glad that the Chancellor has been able to make these announcements today, and I welcome the £400 million for Northern Ireland, which will help to recruit police officers, to reduce waiting lists and to give some relief to school budgets. But does he recognise that if he's going to realise his goal of levelling growth across the United Kingdom, there is still much more that needs to be done to ensure that resources are sent to places like Northern Ireland and other regions of the United Kingdom in order to make sure that growth is experienced equally across the United Kingdom?
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is making a very important point, and can I thank him for first of all the welcome of the extra £400 million for Northern Ireland, but also about levelling up growth across the country. I referred a number of times to my statement earlier about making sure we have that growth in every part of our great UK, and that includes, for example, with infrastructure investment, and I hope that when I set out the infrastructure strategy later this year, he will welcome it for those reasons.
So it's outrage.
Mr. Richard Bacon.
Mr. Speaker, can the Chancellor tell us when we can expect an announcement on funding for service plots of land?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, can I first take this opportunity to thank my honourable friend for all the work that he has done on self-build homes and generally in promoting easier access to homes for everyone, and that is something that we are discussing with MHCLG, and I will take it up further and I will get back to him.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm surprised that the Chancellor has the cheek to call this a spending review because, frankly, it is nothing of the sort. Exactly. And it's no surprise that the Office for Budget Responsibility did not dignify this with its own economic and fiscal analysis, which is normal with a spending review. The Chancellor said when he made his 3-year commitment for school spending that he recognises the importance of schools being able to plan. So can I ask the Chancellor, should local governments be able to plan for the future when investing in social care, in youth services and tackling homelessness? And if he does think that they should be able to prepare and plan for the future, why did they not get a 3-year settlement as well?
Councillor.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all just say gently to the Honourable Lady, this is a spending round. I haven't referred to it as a spending review. She may know that a spending review normally is a number of years, and this is one single year. She also then said that I think her words are, I didn't dignify it with an OBR forecast. Well, no spending review or spending round comes with an OBR forecast. That's normally done at a budget, and there's 2 forecasts a year, and I thought she may know that, but I'm happy to let her know. Then she also talked about funding in certain areas, whether it's social care, in youth services, and I have referred to those. I've set out plans for next year, but also plans for the future, for example, with the new Youth Investment Fund.
John Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor clearly recognises the importance of growing the economy, because a growing economy is how we afford public services. To help achieve growth, particularly in the north, I understand there have been certain discussions about the possible creation of free ports in the north of England. Carlisle Lake District Airport, owned by Stobbarts, commenced its commercial flights recently, and they have ambition to create an airport free port. Is that something the Chancellor would support?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be very happy to take a look at that proposal. My honourable friend will know already we have accelerated our work generally on free ports, and that work's being led by the Trade Secretary and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, but I'd be very happy to look at an airport free port proposal.
Chris Bryant.
Instead of wasting £4 billion on no deal, can he just spend some money in the Rhondda, please? Just 2% of that figure would pay for finishing off the Rhondda-Vach Relief Road, rebuilding Llyn-y-Forwyn School, buying new trains which might actually be clean and run on time for the Treherbert line, providing a new home for the Rhondda Sea Cadets, and paying for a new PET-CT scanner for South Wales.
Councillor.
Mr. Speaker, well, the good news is we don't have to choose between investing in leaving the EU and investing in Rhondda or anywhere else in the country. And the reason is because under the Conservatives, you'll have a strong economy, but if that party was ever in charge, then we wouldn't have the money to invest anywhere.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for his statement and particularly the focus on rebuilding our infrastructure? And of course, he is right to ensure that it delivers value for money. Can I therefore ask that he has another look at the Lower Thames crossing to ensure that it is delivering value for money, and also that it delivers its primary aim of relieving congestion at the existing Dartford crossing?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, the general point my honourable friend makes about infrastructure, about value for money, he is, of course, absolutely right. And as we spend more on infrastructure, we've got to make sure that principle is always maintained. And he's invited me to take a further look at the Lower Thames crossing. I would be happy to do that, and I'd also be happy to discuss it with him.
Caroline Lucas.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor tells us that the challenge of decarbonisation is real, as if he's only just discovered it. But we face a climate emergency, so why haven't we had a spending round that would actually match that climate emergency? Green groups are urging him to commit at least 2% of GDP on immediate climate action. Is he going to do it, or is it just going to pile up with all of his other broken promises?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, can I say to the Honourable Lady, in this spending round, because, again, if I may point out, it is focused on day-to-day resource spending. She may know, so, for example, some very important investments that will need to be made in decarbonisation will be capital investments, and that's just not covered today. But it doesn't mean to say it's not going to happen, it's not taken seriously. But one step that we have taken today is provide more funding to BEIS to work with the Treasury on the decarbonisation plan to meet the net 2050 targets, and that is an additional funding of 30 million to work on that programme. And there are also other measures I announced today that would help. So, for example, the £200 million on buses, which will be low and ultra low emission buses, and I hope she would welcome that too.
When will the Prime Minister finally apologise?
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Chancellor to his position. Blaby District Council and Harborough District Council, both in my South Leicestershire constituency, would greatly welcome a meeting, the leaders of Conservative-led councils, with the local government finance minister. Would the Chancellor help to organise that so that the Minister can discuss the additional funds that the Chancellor has announced today?
Mr. Speaker, I will gladly help my honourable friend to organise such a meeting, and I will certainly speak to ministers in the relevant department.
Yvette Cooper.
The Chancellor will know the Home Affairs Select Committee has called for a long time for substantial additional resources for policing, and this is important. So can he confirm that the 750 million he refers to is a real terms increase and is all central government funding, as he will know that central government funding for policing has been cut by £3 billion since 2010? Can he also confirm this is not yet enough to fund the restoration of over 20,000 police officers that have been cut since 2010, and that it also does not reverse any of the cuts of 7,000 PCSOs and 5,000 specials since 2010?
Chancellor.
What I can confirm to the Right Honourable Lady, and I hope she finds it helpful, is that for the Home Office, what I did, my starting point was to roll over all funding on real terms that the Home Office had received in this year. And so that was the baseline, which hadn't been done before. And secondly, I added to that the extra costs that were required, the major cost being for the extra officers. So what I can tell her is that the real terms increase in the Home Office budget is £800 million. That's an increase in real terms growth rate of 6.3%, and that is the biggest increase in real terms in the Home Office budget in 15 years.